thanks for getting together with me and just having some time for us to chat, because people have asked and continually over the last years as to why we do what we do, how we get started. I mean, you're the host and you do the introductions and you smile and laugh and all the other things like that. And we started out with our videographer that puts all this together. We started out in his garage filming some of our earliest, yeah, I know, pretty hokey. I had the worst wig in the world. But then Dale's wife.
Hey, Vern, you still have a bad wig.
Unfortunately, this is my true self. And see, people want to know that. Who are we really?
I just thought you were trying to make me feel better.
Follically challenged, I think, is the words that have come back to me.
So you were in a garage.
We were in a garage.
Dale's garage.
Dale's garage. He's right sitting over there. And then his wife, Candy, came to him and said, I would like to park my car in the garage because winter's coming. And we had to find other digs. So here we are.
It was a one-car garage.
Actually, it was a two-car garage, but it's so full of other stuff. Okay. I won't go into, the organization of Dale's garage. That's something else.
But I don't understand. See, when I first met you,
yeah,
you were going from school to school to school to school.
Thank you.
And video wasn't in the picture at all.
Man, what wasn't it?
You know?
Yeah.
And now you said you went into a garage.
Yeah.
And why did you do that? Why did you decide to video?
Well, great question. And you're right. In 2011, there was a fellow, Peter Lilbach, who was an author, wrote a book, Washington's Sacred Fire, and he was coming up the West Coast and talking to anybody that was interested in his book. And he was with his editor, Rolf Augustine, and he had been on the Glenn Beck show, and his book was featured and was a bestseller for a period of time. And so he comes to little old Sequim, Washington. And outside Sequim, we have a place called the George Washington Inn, which is a duplicate of Mount Vernon. And they hosted him, and so 50 or 60 of us met there and listened to him for 4 hours. I mean, we just question after question, and man, this guy...
What were some of the questions you asked?
Well, so he... the question I asked was, wasn't Washington a deist?
Yeah.
And then he said, well, interesting enough that I address some of that in this book here. And he goes on talking about that. And then toward the end of the presentation, he indicated that in July of every year, he leads a group through Philadelphia to all the hot spots.
Oh, wow.
Oh, the Liberty Bell and Franklin's grave. I actually walked by the house that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence.
Wow. In the second-story room.
Second story, you're absolutely right, brother.
So you went with that author on that walk through Philadelphia?
We did in July of 2011.
Wow.
And then we went to Valley Forge, and there was Dean Melissa portraying George Washington.
Huh.
He is the -- portrayer of Washington. And he was Mount Vernon's Washington for, 20 plus years. The guy's excellent. He's got the size, the demeanor, knows the history. I aspire.
Did you talk to him?
Oh, yes.
Why did you do that? Were you thinking in the back of your mind, maybe I should do this too?
No, not at that time.
So you're just talking to this reenactor portraying George Washington, And you just were fascinated asking him questions. And did he answer like he was George?
Yes, he stayed in character the whole time, had a sense of humor, knowing that I was not from where he was from, which is 1799.
Yeah.
But at the end of his presentation to the larger group, I was standing with Dr. Lilbach and Rolf, and I said, you know, I'm from the state of Washington. Somebody should do George Washington.
I don't think Washington has ever had a George Washington, have they? Except like in a float?
As far as I know, there's never been one here. And so that's what I was bemoaning, that we should have one.
That's pathetic.
Yes.
We even have a town called George.
Yes.
And we don't have a George Washington.
And so the editor turned to me and said, well, why don't you do George Washington?
Oh my goodness.
And I do the typical American response, what, me? No, I'm too busy. I have a whole list of things, but he planted the seed.
In 2011, you were pretty busy.
Yeah, amen, yeah. So it, on the way back, I had pondered that, and then I grabbed a book and I read Flexner or Fleener, however you pronounce that, his little summary. He has a 4-volume set, and that's the one. And man.
So Sacred Fire is 4 volumes?
No, Fleener or Flexner is another author that wrote 4.
Okay, so so you read Sacred Fire, and then you went to the 4-volume series.
Yes, right. I thought, this is information that people need to know, and maybe I can kind of gingerly step into the shallow end.
So, I don't get, what's the information people in Washington need to know?
Oh my gosh.
Well, just give me the top 3. What are the top 3 things that Washington doesn't know about George Washington, or doesn't believe in, or forgot, that you, from your reading the books and thinking and visiting and talking to that inspirational role model?
Yeah.
What are they?
Well, I guess that number one, we were still loyalists until 1775. Washington was. We had the First Continental Congress in 1774. We're still loyalists. We're just, for the first time, the 13 colonies got together. How are we going to respond? Because we just wanted the ministry, Parliament, the king, to recognize our rights. And we had, it's called salutary neglect. England had allowed us to exist, to grow, to govern ourselves. They gave us royal governors. In some cases, we had our own governors. And we allowed us to have our own laws that they approved of, tax ourselves, which they approved of, and however we wanted to elect our representatives, we got together. And each colony was a separate entity. Each one of us had a different charter.
And yet we were loyalists.
We were loyalists, and we just wanted our rights, freedom, liberty, rights. And so I think
that message did not come across. I mean, you're right. That didn't come across in history that we considered ourselves British.
Yes, definitely. The greatest power in the world.
Well, of course, yeah, we would want to identify with that.
Greatest rights as English citizens, super economy, biggest army, biggest navy that was so necessary for us to go around the world and bring resources. And America was just resources for the merchants, for the manufacturers, for the bankers, for the legal factors. We put our resources there, they developed them, sold them back to us here. And so it was called mercantilism, this whole system.
But all the colonies were that way, right?
Yes,
so we
exactly.
Didn't feel...
No, that's right. We benefited and we grew and what have you. And so we were loyalists until 1775.
I guess the only other choice is we'd have to say we were French, and there's no way we were going to say that, right?
Yeah.
Not after that war.
Yeah, that's a whole different subject, which is a great subject to get into.
So the number one thing you'd wanted Washington to know is that we were loyalists.
We're loyalists. Second of all, I would think that we were all over the board with 13 colonies. We were like 13 nations. And as a matter of fact, even after we rebelled, a Declaration of Independence, the Congress said, each one of the colonies, you are now states, go and get your own constitutions. And we were still all over the board.
That's genius on the British part.
Okay.
Think about that. If we're going to go salutary neglect, but we foster 13 individual personalities that do not connect, they can't unite. There's nothing to unite them.
Yeah.
The only thing that unites them is their British heritage.
Yeah.
And the shipping from Britain. That was smart. Really. That was very smart.
It was, and it worked for so long. But you know, the 13 colonies, we were so divided, and that's that second thing is our laws were different. And so if you violated Virginia law, all you have to do is go to Maryland or Delaware or Pennsylvania, and that's it. And you're okay. And there was no Supreme Court that said that, and who do you go to complain with? And oh, by the way, let's talk about the navigation rights of certain rivers and who can have import-export duties. The colonies argued about that.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, by the way, what about the borders? Well, no, that's my land. No, that's my land. And
who decides
because
that?
the charters, when they wrote them, there were some things that were not that clear. And so, and then there is taxation in Virginia. We were Anglicans, and we taxed everybody to pay for the Anglican pastors' incomes. It didn't matter whether you were Baptist or Methodist or Catholic or Jewish, you got taxed for the Anglicans. And that wasn't all the states.
No, Rhode Island, I bet, didn't do it.
No, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, there were some exceptions. And then there's those Congregationalists, So we were a patchwork, and each one of us had our own legislators.
So that really sounds, number one, we're loyalists. Number two, we're divided.
Yeah, because
why does America need to hear that?
it has to do with allegiance. Who are we allegiant to? As Virginian, I was allegiant to Virginia and the King. And we were competitive economically as well. Didn't even talk about slavery and the slavery issues there. But we fought with each other, we disagreed, typically didn't take up arms against each other. There were some pub brawls, but so it's important to realize that we were born in adversity. But the third thing is Constitutional Convention. We had gone through Articles of Confederation through the Revolutionary War, and the Articles were so weak. Why were they so weak? Build on point number two. Every colony, now a state, didn't want anybody telling them what to do.
Independence.
Independence, actually.
With a capital I.
Yes, yeah, you got it.
There is an I in independence.
And of course, we invited personalities like that from England, other parts of Europe, where they were fleeing for their independence.
That's right. They're the only ones who could make it.
And they had this strength. Now, they died by the droves for one reason or another, but still there. And then you've got those that were always pushing the frontier. You know, the English couldn't control them. They're always pushing into native land. Even the United States of America, when we formed, couldn't control them. They're always, we didn't have the enforcement and didn't have the laws. And
So, loyalist,
yes.
divided,
Yes.
and then a constitution. Is that like the third point, that it overarches those first 2 points, or
Well,
what does that do?
Well,
Those two.
yeah, the Articles of Confederation, very loose. They did not have an executive or judicial. They just had a body where we talk things to get to death.
Kind of like the UN.
That's you're right. You know, you have to have a unanimous vote to get anything done there, and they was unable to tax. Matter of fact, if they agreed on anything, didn't mean anybody had to do anything. It was just a suggestion. It's like, it's not the 10 Commandments. It's the 10 suggestions, you know. If you feel like this, you know, it was the same thing there. And so every colony more or less said, you know, so there was, no executive judicial, no taxation, you know, so it was weak. Now comes the Revolutionary War, and it suggested that, you know, you could give this many troops, and oh, by the way, you could pay them, you know, you could get them uniforms, you could, you know, provide for food, tents, boots, muskets, hats, cannon, medical. You could if you wanted to. It's not required, you know.
That's amazing, because here's England. Uniform provision, uniform pay, uniforms.
Yeah.
You know, everybody knows exactly what's going to happen, no surprises. And here's 13 different armies, 13 different militias.
Yes.
I still think that was genius on England's part.
Oh,
We're not going to fight one army, we're just going to fight 13 armies.
And it gets even more interesting. And so now they get together, then 1783, Paris Treaty, we go another 4 years trying to make these articles work. Now, once again, as 13 nations working with the rest of the Atlantic and European world. So who does France have a treaty with? 13 different countries. Does that make sense? What about import-export, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And so now we don't have any, the British, our shipping was always protected by the Navy, but we just revolted. Now we're not protected anymore. And economic ties, we had a ready market. Now we have to go and have our different markets there.
Were we shut out of the British markets?
Yes and no.
I bet they made us pay a higher tariff.
Oh man, yeah. But we tried to open up the China market.
Oh,
but
yeah.
we had to sail around to do that, and actually that showed some promise, but not as much, because now we were competing with some other large European powers for that as well.
Well, again, I'm not trying to play Britain's advocate here, but if I were Britain and I decided it was not cost effective to fight 13 brats, I would withdraw and just wait for it to collapse. I mean, the Articles of Confederation are laughable in the way you described it.
Absolutely, yeah.
America should have imploded on itself with its selfishness, self-interest, and greed. It should have just gone right down the tube.
Those are mild words, good sir.
Really?
Yes. It is domination. Look how they faced off against Scotland and Ireland. We will crush you. You will submit.
Yeah.
So it was more than just greed and all that stuff. You know, we must make an example. They sent 30,000 troops, English and Hessians, into New York. New York Harbor looked like a forest with a mass. Wow. Against who? Yeah. Their children.
Yeah.
What's that all about? We will crush you. And our response? We will defy you. I'll tell you what, without New England, without Massachusetts, and their personality and their individualism, you know, we would never have gotten that far. I've just finished a section on Lexington and Concord, and actually in September went over there and visited all those places, and that was a 4-part series, and now going through Bunker Hill, Dorchester Heights, and the evacuation of Boston. And I just, am amazed at how New England did what it did.
How does the Constitution fit with the message for America?
So we got together, and our goal was to upgrade the Articles of Confederation. Another power they had was to write treaties, and so we were getting together for that. But both the Massachusetts and the Virginia delegations had some other ideas about there's no way that we can adjust that, because again, it's 13 different, it's a confederation. Mm-hmm. And we had to have a central government, not a nationalist government, but a federal government that took care of the things that were common to us all. And so George, as well as the rest of the Virginia delegation, got together, and one of the first things that came up was that Virginia proposed a federal government. And that took things, and they began to chat about those.
So I have a question. Who was president during the Articles of Confederation?
Oh, we had 19 different presidents. Yeah, I didn't even think about that, Tom, but you're right. Churn. Some served for a month or two.
If I was in London and I was reading the newspaper, the Philadelphia Tribune or whatever they call it, Ben Franklin's newspaper, I would be laughing. Oh, another president. Oh, that was 2 weeks. I think we shall be going back to America very soon to help our little cousins out.
Try to run a war with that going on, with inadequate troops, inadequate armament. Gunpowder was the biggest thing that we just couldn't get, because all our gunpowder had come from England before. Mm-hmm. Now we were left to stealing it from whoever we could. Mm-hmm. You even went down to the Bahamas and stole the gunpowder. But it was chaotic. 8.5 years, quite frankly. I was going through at one point, and there were 8, 10, 12 different times when we could have lost the war. It just wasn't, it was amazing that we survived.
Would you call it miraculous?
I would say miraculous.
Would George call it miraculous?
He called it providential. Okay, the word he used hundreds of times. So the Constitution, so we have these articles, 87 we get together, and Virginia, Massachusetts, others are prepared for a federal constitution. They propose it, the thing that they do, and people agree that they can't take the articles and make it work. So the first thing that they did is they boarded up all the windows. And if you've been there, you know they're tall windows there. And they boarded it up. They swore everybody to secrecy, because the legislatures many of them specifically said it's only adjusting, modifying the articles. And so right from the get-go, they were violating what they, as delegates and representative of their state, were tasked to do.
Just for a second. What time of the year was this?
Oh gosh, I believe this was May, June, July.
And they boarded up the windows?
Yes, yes.
They were sweating to
Yes.
death inside this closed up little building.
Absolutely no wind. Of course,
so-
no air conditioning, so
So I'm trying to visualize. Virginia stands up. We propose to have a federal government. And the instant reaction of all the delegates is, lock the doors, board up the windows, let's turn this into a sauna.
it was a little more complicated than that. It was a proposal. People began to talk about it, and so it wasn't that direct. It was just something that they laid out. Now, you have to realize too that no records were kept except for Jimmy's, Madison's notes. Didn't come to light until mid-1800s.
So it was really secret.
Yes, you could not take your notes
Out of the
wherever
building.
That's it. So it 3, 4 o'clock each day it was retired. They would go and meet at different pubs and what have you.
And try and cool off.
Yeah, with a brew. Washington was the president of the Constitutional Convention, and the president makes sure that things were done orderly, Robert's Rules of Order, that type of thing. But he had no input, except occasionally he would go and vote with the Virginia legislation. But his presence had a calming effect on the entire proceedings. However, at 3 or 4 o'clock every afternoon, he was free to join others and give his input.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, in reading about what went on, what the issues were, and trying to say, okay, we've got to make sure we balance this federal government with the state governments. We don't want to replicate what we have been under for 150 years. We want them only to do certain things. And so in the Constitution, they made sure there was this separation of powers between federal, state, and we the people. So the rights that the federal government and the states had would not impinge on the rights of the people. And of course, that's why the Bill of Rights was so important. When the Constitution went out for ratification by all of the states, the Bill of Rights was not part of that. And there were those that said, no way are we passing this. George Mason was one of those guys that was up in arms, because we the people.
Okay, George, I'm talking to as George. When you come back to your home state from Philadelphia with your delegates, and the governor and the legislature says, well, boys, did we fix the Articles of Confederation? How do we do on that treaty? Because you were gone a long time. And rumors say the windows were boarded up. And you won't, no letters home, no inkling, no what? So, George, so what did you tell the governor? What did you tell the legislature?
I don't specifically recall, but I'll tell you what Ben Franklin said.
Was he in that too?
He was there. Yeah, we needed his calming influence as well. And as he's leaving, and he was in his mid-80s and couldn't get around, and so he had a chase chair with poles, kind of like the Chinese emperor, empress, and had guys carrying him. And he was stopped by Miss Powell, I forget her first name, Eleanor or something like that, brilliant woman, and said, Dr. Franklin, and said something like, what have you done to us, or what do we have? What did you come up with? And he leans out of his chaise and says, Madame, you have a democratic republic if you can keep it. Well, that's the third thing. Well, we're right in the middle of that right now in 2023.
Yeah.
A democrat, or maybe he said a republic if you can keep it.
If we can keep it.
Yes, but democracy, we the people, we have freedoms that are guaranteed, and we can declare what we think and who we are and where we want to go. We want to say, this is not just, and it's not. So we need to change that, or this is not equal, and just what have you. We are a country that have allowed all generations to challenge things that we didn't even think about 250 years ago and say, it is for all Americans. That's part of what we're going through, but here's another aspect of it. There are responsibilities as a citizen. Go back, and to immigrants that are still flooding to our shores. Why? Because of what people came to the shores to 400 years ago, those that weren't enslaved. They came for the same types of things, and still coming, because we're still a beacon of that. So we go to immigrants coming over, and they have a little booklet, and they go through it, and they see what it is that they have to do as part of being an American citizen. They no longer have allegiance to any other government, any other entity. They have allegiance to America. And that allegiance is to support the nation, to obey the laws, to be good citizens, working within the prescribed laws and Constitution of the United States. And, Washington, time and time again, emphasized that point. We have instruments that when you see injustice, where we can walk through and make changes, but outside of that, that's unlawful. And a government, to promote security and stability and safety, must enact those laws. When the laws are unjust, then we need to address those and change those. Many laws, it's taken forever to do that. But the overall view is the health of the nation, of the country.
So Ben Franklin said, if you can keep it. Did he think that it would be hard to keep it?
So they went back into history, and of course also Enlightenment thinking. So what democracies were there in history, and how long did they last?
Yeah, Greece.
Greece, and?
That lasted 20 years.
Okay. Rome.
It wasn't democracy.
Oh, okay.
It was a republic.
A republic, and you're right, and those are the two examples, yeah.
The 5 Iroquois nations had a democracy.
They
had a republican and a democratic thing where each lodge voted, and the chief didn't tell them what to believe. They told the chief, this is what we want. But then he went from Sachem to Sachem to Sachem, and Thomas Jefferson said, agreed with you that we should base our country on the 5 Iroquois nations and their system of government.
I didn't realize he said that. But
and women had power in that.
Yes, the matrons had.
Anyway, what democracies do you know of other than Greece?
Pretty much that. And why did Greece fail?
It didn't work.
Why didn't it work?
Well, by the time everybody's trying to agree, the Spartans have already taken over the city. So they had to make a dictator, which that's a Greek term, diktos, that someone who could say it and know, and that whatever he said was the law, and then hope that the dictator would give up power when Sparta was beaten. But he didn't.
Hopefully, yes. And so we go back there now. So how large were these democracies? I mean, they were city-states, right?
Yeah, right.
And how large were they?
Athens was just itself, 50 miles?
Okay.
That was it.
Population of?
All of Greece was not a democracy, just Athens. Corinth wasn't, Philippi wasn't,
all right.
Thebes wasn't, just Athens.
Just Athens, okay. And you see, that's why it was important during the Constitutional Convention that there are others that were wiser and knew history better than myself. I mean, as you know, as Vern Frykholm, my degree is in anthropology. But still, I have a love for our history. And that was only what, 25,000 people?
Yeah, it wasn't very much.
And it was a direct democracy?
Yeah.
And so how many people could address any issue?
All of them.
All of them.
And they had to all meet. They had to all vote on everything. They had little pieces of clay. They'd make a mark on the clay, put it in the pot, had to count all the pieces of clay. And because it would, krasi, power, kratos, demos, people. The power rests with the people. Only the people, nothing in between. It took them forever to do anything.
Okay.
You sure got to speak a lot.
Yeah.
And the loudmouths loved it. And the practical people said, we're not going to make it. We're not going to make it. But see, they had so many strong, terrible kings that could just kill you like that, that they said, well, it can't be worse than that. It was.
Okay. And so this was 25, 30, 40,000 people within how many miles? 30 miles?
50.
50, okay. So now you take that democracy and you bring it to the United States during the Constitutional Convention. I think it was 4 to 5 million people over 3,000 miles.
Yeah.
A democracy isn't going
Wouldn't
to work.
Unless you had some sort of communication, some system of communication. They didn't, did they?
Well, there wasn't. Well, no, I think Dr. Franklin had a postal service.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they had to have a road system, except the road system wasn't so good back then.
Because it was supported by the federal government, I bet.
You have to
Under
have
the
taxes.
Articles of Confederation.
Have to have taxes to do that.
Yeah.
So it then the Republic. Why didn't the Republic of Rome succeed?
It did succeed. It succeeded for a long time until Julius Caesar. And then they said, well, it's still here. We're still calling it, SPQR, but everybody realized it's just a king. It's just one king killing another king. They call himself Caesar. Yeah, he killed it off.
Okay.
But it went from almost 500 years.
Yeah, but eventually failed.
And that's again, because power, military power and economic power crushed law.
Why?
The Senate let it happen. And they thought they could stop it by killing Julius Caesar. They thought, we are law. But see, the Senate was all about power too.
Really?
Yeah. And so, the people got an input on voting for a council, to go on to that and stuff like that. But it was like we just traded one power-hungry individual for a power-hungry group.
Okay.
And the reason he did that was, well, the Senate was just out of control.
Okay.
They ordered Caesar to come back so that they could put him on trial for treason, and he came back. But we brought his legion.
Yes. What was the name of that river?
Yeah.
Rubicon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. John Adams, when he talked about, I think it was Lexington and Concord, or it could have been Bunker Hill, where he said, the Rubicon has been crossed.
Yeah.
In the colonies there was no going back, which is interesting. Aristotle, when I go into classrooms dressed as George and typically 8th grade, 5th grade as well, talk about Aristotle 2,200 years before. And he talked about 6 forms of government that, and he said the best form of government was a dictatorship.
The best was a dictatorship.
Yes, and so I have somebody from the audience to come up and I say, okay, you're my volunteer, come on up here, and you're a king there, and you're a dictator. You're a benevolent dictator. Your people love you. Everybody out there loves you. And I mean, you provide clothing and food, and they're secure and they thrive, and health, and just on and on. Education, and they feel secure and they're able to grow and prosper and have opportunities. But it's going so well that the nations around you aren't doing as well, and you want to help them too. So now what you need to do is grab another nation. But in order to do that, you need troops. And where are you going to get the troops? Well, it's going to be the children of your citizens, but you can convince them that it's a good thing to do because we're doing so well, and they need to do as well as us, and oh, by the way, who's going to pay for those troops and everything?
Yeah, the children.
Well, now, and yeah, you got to have taxes, so off you go. You grab that, and then it just kind of goes on and on. And so the benevolent dictator becomes a tyrant. And he has to have a larger police force.
Because you have national security issues.
Yeah, and people have to be in line. And so the best form of government is a benevolent dictator. But over time, and the volunteer, I have them take a step at a time here. They don't go.
They move from being
benevolent to a tyrant, and actually it kind of starts with he sees the other rulers of the area are having parties, and he's decided I'm going to have a party, and he's got to have a bigger party and a bigger band, and he's got to have better clothing. But it comes from this benevolence to taking a look of self in this, and ambition, and then it comes to tyranny.
Yeah.
Aristotle said the second best form of government is an aristocracy or nobles.
Oh yeah, noble class.
Yes.
Kind of like the upper house of Parliament, the House of Lords.
At one time, possibly, the key word is, let me see, what was that? Benevolent.
Oh, a benevolent.
A benevolent aristocracy, which a lot of times they start out that way. What is best for the people? I would say you go back to both Greece and Rome, and you see that benevolence, and just as long as they are taking care of the people, and doing it out of a heart of grace and mercy, that it works. But they like their parties too, and of course, if they just had the resources of this country over here, I mean, they pretty well used up their resource because they're so successful, And anyway, we've got ships with sails, and now we can sail on other. So we really need to have a larger army, and where do we go, and how do we get the money? So they become a
tyrant.
Tyrants, an oligarchy.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's number 3?
Which Number 3, the third best form of government is a polity.
A polity.
Yes, which is the people ruling themselves through whatever organization they have. Once again, the catchword is benevolent. And so as long as the people have hearts of benevolence and want what's best for other people, that's their primary goal. The allegiance is what's best for the people. But you know, they start to disagree about what is best, okay? And so then they have more and more conflict and everything. But the thing about a polity is where do you go when the people disagree and they want their way and they can't convince the others? Well, you go to the worst form of government.
Number 6.
Number 6. What do you think that worst form of government is?
Anarchy?
Democracy. I didn't say it. Aristotle said it. Well, really? Yes. Well, what do you mean? Well, again, go ahead. You got a question?
Yes. So, the founders of George Washington, the founders and your friends, you are well read, and you're trying to form a system of government. You all own land and successful businesses, and you're educated, so you are the aristocracy.
Yes, we would not call ourselves an aristocracy.
No, you wouldn't call yourself.
We would call ourselves leaders.
Yes, you were a leader.
And all nations have leaders.
Because you took the risk to make your plantation successful or to make your business successful or whatever, okay?
Education, what have you.
Right. And you, rather than trusting the people, hey, what kind of government should we have, and let everybody try to vote and everything like that, you decided we will argue it out as gentlemen, and we will compromise and negotiate.
Yes.
And we will come up with something.
Yes.
But you knew you did not want a dictatorship. So you picked George Washington to be the president because you knew he was benevolent.
He could be trusted.
And he didn't want the job. Right?
Yeah, he didn't want the job, right? Yeah.
He'd already sacrificed too much for his country already. He had not seen Mount Vernon in so long, you know. And so they picked you to head this government, which is kind of like a hybrid of things, would you say?
I think so, because they went back, they took a look at history. The abuses that you have brought up in Greece and Rome, well aware of. Enlightenment thinking, because it was in a sea of kings and queens, czars and czarinas, dukes, duchesses, all of that. So there was this elite aristocracy over the European nations there, and they had kind of a life of their own. They were independent of the laws and what have you, and the majority of people, 90% plus, were beholden to them in they didn't own their own land. They were tenant farmers, what have you. And also then there's the merchant class and the professionals that aren't part of this noble aristocracy, but they also are a privileged group. And so elite and privileged, but controlling where the mass of people were just beholden to them. And, if you went through London in the 1700s, they had a lot of positive things, but they had a lot of negative things where people were disposable. And so we're
and
going.
you said England was the best of
Yeah.
all the empires. It was the best government.
Yeah, that's true, and that's
Wow, and if that was bad, imagine what the others were like.
Yeah, so we get together and we say, where do we take this massive information, boil it down, knowing that the heart of man, starts out benevolent, wants the best, but slowly moves to wanting more. And I think that's a catchword. What do you got? You want more.
Yeah.
And where's the focus? The focus is on yourself. Mm-hmm. Even though you can portray yourself as something else, it's really power, greed, the focus of more, whatever, just more. Even Rockefeller, I understand, when he was interviewed as the richest man in the world, he was asked, how much is enough? And he thought, and he said, more. So we're trying to put the government together with this backdrop. We need an executive. We've worked that out. We need a judicial, but we need a legislature to represent the people. The legislature, the strongest and the most powerful of the three houses, but we need these three branches. We need them to be independent so that the judicial can just interpret the Constitution and say what is constitutional, what's not, and the executive merely carries out the wishes of the legislature. So the legislature was this huge thing, and the other two were subservient and really much weaker.
Could I ask you a question? You were the executive, right, as George Washington?
I was, yes.
How big was your government? I mean, your executive branch.
We started with nothing. It was a piece of paper. A cabinet wasn't even provided. But I knew that man, of all the presidents, the formal education that George Washington had was possibly the least or similar or a little bit more than Lincoln. And isn't it amazing that two of our greatest presidents
are not the educated elite?
Not the educated, but they read. They also surrounded themselves with wise people, such as a cabinet.
So is that one of the first things you did to make your government bigger? Who did you put in your cabinet?
Well, of course, Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, Jefferson, State, Knox, War, and Edmund Randolph with the judiciary there.
That's not a very big government.
No, not it is. And
you could fit in a car.
Exactly.
No offense, or a wagon.
Yeah, I would prefer to have them in a wagon because Jefferson and Hamilton pretty well had tremendous differences about what a democratic republic looks like, and we are still in 2023. Many of those things still separate us as to what it looks like. I mean, and again, we're separated to that. So we are going through and trying to come up with a government a federal government that is very, very limited. The states were to be more powerful than the federal government, and the people more powerful than the states. So as George, when I go in and I address certain groups, political groups I chat with, and I've also talked with church groups, and I have also been in the Liberty Bar on Capitol Hill in Seattle. And hey, lots of things got done in bars. We call them pubs. But this is a group of men that met Sunday nights and talked history and had George in. So we're trying to put this together and make it workable so there are adequate checks and balances because...
So just to be clear, the federal government was on the bottom as far as having the power.
Right.
Then the states.
Right. Yeah.
And then the people.
Then the people. and they
Wow,
would.
it sure has flipped, hasn't it?
I would think so. Yes, the people were to be involved. The people were to feel that the nation, if the nation remained strong, they would remain strong. And so their representatives would reflect their values, which is the nation beyond states and feds, because it's we, the people. In order to do that, they must compromise on certain things. The diversity was tremendous back then, and knowing that different people had different approaches, that they wanted a government that would be fair, equal, just, and so you have to make compromises for we the people. And so that's the task we would give our representatives in Congress, that then would pass laws and give direction to the executive to take their will and put it into practice, and the judicial to make sure that it is whatever laws we pass is the is.
So it sounds like you're saying that even in the federal government, you had it that the legislature was the top.
Yes, yes.
And then the executive and the judicial were very, very small.
Very
as far
small.
as having,
Yes.
they all three could veto each other, but they.
That's the beauty.
Yeah.
Yes.
But most of the power came with the legislature, because the Congress, they got their power from the people,
yeah.
and the other legislatures in the states.
That was our goal. Of course, we also said that the Constitution would fail. Okay, so it's the people thinking nation, country over just their own wants and everything. Let's go back to democracy as the worst form. And let me define that before we come back there. Democracy is 50% plus one rules.
Yeah.
Aristotle said it's mob rule. So
It is.
if 50% plus one rules, you can do anything to the other group you want. Until there's a change and they become 50 plus one, and then they can do that. Aristotle said it'll eat each other.
Almost like watching the game of Survivor.
Yeah, yes, yeah. And so as a democracy, mob rule will either result in tyranny, or a word that you used earlier, anarchy. Each man did what was right in his own eyes. And so democracies are extremely fragile. That, by Aristotle, said either you will have a strong man that rules, or you'll have anarchy. So that's why my next statement, the framers of the Constitution said, if this one thing failed in the people, the Constitution, our way of life, would fail. What do you think that one aspect, that one character of the people was?
Voting?
That's part of the responsibilities.
But, okay.
Voting, obeying laws.
Character?
What aspect of character?
I don't know.
Well,
Morality? Benevolence. Come on, teacher, throw me a bone. I'm trying.
No, you're hitting all aspects. This is something that has multiple petals. Okay, so you're hitting that. They said virtue.
Oh, man.
When the virtue of the people.
Virtue is a bad word now.
Yes.
If someone is called virtuous, they can't even get a job. They can't get elected. They can't be taken seriously.
They can come work for me.
What does virtue mean to you, Vern?
You see? And there you have it. Now we have any philosophical debate starts with defining of terms. What do we mean by virtue?
Well, Aristotle talked about it. Socrates talked about it.
Yes, he did. Both of them did, and more. And
Christ talked about it.
And so your question to me is, Vern, what did you think? Or as George, what did you think?
I would be more, no offense, Vern, but you're not very interesting.